So what's the deal with the face on Mars? Let's take a closer look at all the research you probably never heard of until today. Today we're examining the enigmatic face on Mars. Included in this presentation are interviews with George Haas and Matt Barone, as well as an examination of Dr. Mark Carlotto's research related to the face's symmetry, geometry, and fractal analysis. The face on Mars was originally photographed by NASA's Viking orbiter in 1976. And since its public debut, it's caused quite a stir, to say the least. Here you can see the original image, which is speckled with small black dots all over, basically just noise caused by data transmission errors. Ultimately, NASA chose not to interpret this as a face, instead choosing to only consider it a natural landform. Specifically, they call it a knob, which is a geological term that basically means glacial deposit of loose material. But that didn't stop the public from maintaining its interest in the face for the past half-century. But since NASA didn't further investigate the possibility of the face being man-made or an artificial creation, it compelled a group of independent researchers from a variety of different scientific disciplines to study it further. Most notably, a man named Richard Hoagland was primarily responsible for leading the charge. For those familiar with the blockbuster Marvel superhero films, one could argue that Mr. Hoagland is the Nick Fury of the Mars disclosure community. Early in his career, Richard Hoagland was a science advisor to Walter Cronkite. He later became a science journalist covering NASA's Viking mission, and ultimately he put together the independent Mars investigative team. For a comprehensive look into how the independent Mars disclosure movement started, and how events unfolded in real time, I highly recommend reading his book titled The Monuments of Mars. Back in those days, photographs were printed out and examined carefully. The face itself was originally discovered by NASA scientist Dr. Tobias Owen. As Mr. Hoagland recounts in his book, Dr. Owen discovered the face, quote, while on his hands and knees with a magnifying glass, looking at a set of mosaic Polaroids for a safe site for Viking Lander 2. Dr. Owen said aloud something to the effect of, "Oh my God, look at this. It's a face." So NASA immediately held a press conference to get ahead of the story. Chief scientist of the Viking mission was Gerald Soffen. Addressing the face directly, he said, quote, "Isn't it peculiar what tricks of lighting and shadow can do?" He continued by saying, "When we took a picture a few hours later, it all went away. On the next orbit, it all went away. The feature looked quite different." Now, this statement by Gerald Soffen was in fact a lie. And I don't use that word lightly. The fact is, the face on Mars wasn't photographed again until 35 days later. And we only know this through the works of Hoagland's investigative team, specifically the likes of Vince DiPietro and Greg Molinar. They spent their spare time sifting through hundreds, if not thousands of images, looking through years of Viking orbiter photographs. And it wasn't until a few years later that they actually discovered additional photographs of the face. And despite what Gerald Soffen would have everyone believe, the fact is the facial features actually held up upon further scrutiny even under different lighting conditions on a different day, as seen here in this cleaned up, despeckled comparison. More on the facial features in a bit. The point is, NASA had a few years head start on the narrative surrounding the face. They made everyone believe that there was nothing to it, and essentially everyone bought into the narrative. As a side note, in their independent investigation, Vince DiPietro and Greg Molinar actually discovered another unique feature about 12 miles away from the face. A symmetrical, five-sided pyramid, oriented in the same direction as the face, with repeated expressions of 30, 60, and 90-degree angles. It's been nicknamed after them, and even NASA will refer to it as the D&M Pyramid. If you'd like a deep dive into that structure, please watch my extended interview with Mars researcher George Haas, previously published on my YouTube channel. Upon learning of the newly discovered photographs of the face, Mr. Hoagland immediately got to work putting his team together. Hoagland was fascinated by the face, writing in his book, quote, "There is no middle ground. It either is or is not artificial. If it's not worth worrying about. If it is imperative that we figure it out because it does not belong there." Hoagland spent years of his life educating the public about the face, even giving a presentation to the United Nations in 1992. Joining Mr. Hoagland's team were the likes of Dr. John Brandenburg, Dr. Randy Pozos, Dr. Mark Carlotto, and Professor Stanley McDaniel of Sonoma State University. Given the photographic evidence of what appeared to be artificially created structures on Mars, Professor McDaniel was compelled to publish a book in 1993 known as the McDaniel Report on the failure of executive, congressional, and scientific responsibility in investigating possible evidence of artificial structures on the surface of Mars. That's quite a title. In this book, he criticized NASA for 20 years of, quote, inaction, misplaced actions, and outright deceptive actions, which is potentially the most egregious crime against science in the history of science. Fast forward to today, and there are dozens, if not hundreds of examples of pyramids, structures, ruins, artifacts, photographed by NASA that support what this original Mars investigative team were seeing back in the original Viking photographs. But let's get back to the face. Remember, Viking chief scientist Gerald Soffen told the press the facial features went away under different lighting conditions. As proven later by DiPietro and Molinar, the facial features were still there. Supporting this claim was the work of an artist known as Cynthia. She modeled the face out of clay and worked with Hoagland to photograph her sculpture under different lighting conditions, which demonstrated that the facial features did indeed remain no matter what the light was doing. Dr. Mark Carlotto joined the team later, offering another approach towards modeling the face. Dr. Carlotto is currently an aerospace engineer who specializes in image processing, pattern recognition, mapping, and machine learning. In the 1980s, he put together a 3D computer rendering of the face using a technique known as shape from shading. He exchanged a few letters with Carl Sagan at the time, even getting Sagan to admit, quote, "I certainly agree that Jerry Soffen's trick of lighting offhand remark is in error." Sagan went on to use Dr. Carlotto's enhanced images of the face on his special TV presentation of Cosmos. Dr. Carlotto also spoke with Star Trek's Nichelle Nichols on an episode for the Sci-Fi Channel's Inside Space. For more with Dr. Carlotto, please watch my extended interview with him in the Mars Disclosure documentary titled Blue Planet Red, now streaming worldwide. But here's what the face looks like today. Arguably, it's different from how it appeared in the original Viking photographs of 1976. And even in 1998, the face appeared different still, thoroughly confusing many, even today, who wondered why it started looking nothing like the 1976 or current photos. Fortunately, there's an explanation in Dr. Mark Carlotto's research paper published in 2001 concerning the 1998 photo. Quote, JPL's geometrically stretched version of the face, which was widely disseminated over the internet by JPL and the media, is also shown for comparison. Because of the oblique viewing geometry of the Mars Global Surveyor image, the left side of the face appears wider than it really is, while the right side appears narrower, with much of it obscured by the central ridge. As shown in the figure, orthorectification corrects for this effect. In other words, once the off-axis 1998 image was corrected by a process known as orthorectification, it matches better with what the face actually looks like when viewed directly overhead in this correctly imaged 2001 photograph of the face, with some differences in brightness and contrast due to sun angle. We'll explain more about orthorectification in just a moment. While there have been claims made that NASA is deliberately manipulating images of the face, addressing those claims is outside of the scope of this video and, in my opinion, entirely unnecessary for the argument. Now, what is the argument? Richard Hoagland says exactly in his book. Quote, "Its presence, if it was made by someone, is trying very hard to tell us something extraordinary. What better way to call attention to a specific place on Mars as a site for further exploration? Place something strikingly familiar on the landscape, a resemblance to the dominant intelligence on the planet most likely to one day send explorers. Earth." Now I know what you might be thinking. There's this fancy word that NASA and academia and Neil deGrasse Tyson like to throw around, right? You know the word, pareidolia. Now, what the heck is pareidolia? Pareidolia, a situation in which someone sees a pattern or image of something that does not exist. In simpler terms, you're crazy, man, and you're just seeing things. One of the most famous examples of pareidolia is a stone structure named the Old Man in the Mountain, located in New Hampshire. Unfortunately, the structure has collapsed, but it was so well known that it was actually included on the state's license plate, stamps, road signs, and coins. No one actually thought that this was artificially created to purposefully be seen as the profile of an old man's face, but still, throughout millennia, people in the area saw it and drew inspiration from it. Another well-known example, although a bit silly by comparison, is the face on the moon. Dark patches created by meteor impacts or other natural processes create this funny image that we all pretend is just a face, just for fun. But on Mars, the fun continues, where other natural features just so happen to look like faces. You know, if I were to ask you to point out which one of these looks like a bear and which one looks like Cookie Monster, I'm sure most of you would be able to do it. The point is, our eyes are trained to see faces. This is why Dr. Tobias Owen did what most people would do if they were to see what arguably looks like a 1.5 mile long friggin' face staring back at them from the surface of Mars. They would say, "Oh my God, it's a face." Tobias Owen later downplayed any significance of the face in a book that he co-authored with Donald Goldsmith titled The Search for Life in the Universe in 2002. In it, they presented the purposefully inaccurate 1998 version of the face, conveniently leaving out the 2001 version of the face, and then they had the audacity to write that the face is nothing more than a tabloid story supported by radical conspiracy theorists, and that the face was created by wind, water, and time. Yeah, it just sounds like someone's getting a bit defensive, if you ask me. The primary question is, was it intended to be a face? You see, NASA likes to use this word pareidolia to explain away any significance of the face, citing that there's simply no other evidence to support the claim of artificiality on Mars. But it's not just with the face that NASA uses this term. NASA will use the word pareidolia to try to explain every single anomaly found on Mars. This perfectly smooth cylinder halfway buried in a hillside? Pareidolia. This symmetrical four-sided pyramid that looks like the Pyramid of the Moon in Teotihuacan, Mexico? Pareidolia. The square on Mars that Boston University geology professor Robert Schoch said was not a natural formation in a published research paper? Pareidolia. And what about this thing flying in the sky on Mars? It's just pareidolia. Crazy people. Stop looking into things. They use it for everything, basically. They just try to Jedi mind trick you into thinking that there's nothing to see here. So please move along. Why? Why do they do that? I think it's because they have no better reason than because it's on Mars. That's why. That's your answer. That can't possibly be what you think it is because it's on Mars. That's not a good answer. Okay, so now to be fair, just viewing it through the lens of artistic interpretation doesn't really advance the argument that far. Arguably, the detail in more recent photographs reveals a less obvious face, further adding confusion to the whole debate. Proponents of an artificially created face argue that the right side has been damaged, either due to some catastrophe, erosion, or sediment deposition, or a combination of all three. But is it really outside the realm of possibility that they're right? I mean, imagine what Mount Rushmore would look like 100,000 years from now. Or what about 1 million? Or 100 million? Arguably, it wouldn't look pristine like it does now. Here's a crude demonstration. What you're seeing here is nothing more than baking flour you buy from the grocery store with an obvious impression of a face. Slightly disturbing the face leaves it with some damage, yet the core structure of the face remains. Now, is it possible the face on Mars has just enough damage so that the question of artificiality cannot be entirely ruled in nor out? Mars was Earth-like before Earth, and the best estimates NASA has is that it lost its atmosphere, putting the planet into a deep freeze about 3.5 billion years ago. Now, let's just say they're right on this one. Well, even if they're wrong, let's just say by 2 billion years, that still means the surface of the planet is 1 billion years old. That's ancient. Okay, so I'm not bothered by the fact that some of these structures are a little damaged. Okay, relatively speaking, they held up pretty well. And since we haven't yet determined the true dating of our own megalithic structures here on Earth, how can we possibly be so sure of their age? Perhaps they're much older than we suspect. One thing's for sure, if you want something to last eons, you gotta make it out of stone. Some people even compare the face with the Egyptian pharaoh headdresses. For an analysis on this possible connection, please be sure to read Graham Hancock's book on Mars titled The Mars Mystery, which he co-authored with Robert Bauval. In addition to Pareidolia, there's also a famous quote by Carl Sagan that people like to repeat, often incessantly I might add, in order to downplay any significance related to the face on Mars. Quote, "Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence." And there you have it, folks. Case closed. Sorry for wasting your time. The skeptics and keyboard warriors have unfortunately won this battle. Good night. I'll see you next time. But wait! There's more to the story. Carl Sagan's quote is quite memorable, arguably poetic, and every time somebody brings it up, I respond with another quote by Carl Sagan. And this is something taken from his Cosmos book and Cosmos TV series. Intelligent life first reveals itself through the geometric regularity of its constructions. In other words, if you're an alien looking down on any planet, how would you first know that there's intelligent life down on the surface below? You would know by clearly defined geometry. What are we talking about here? Straight roads, buildings, grid-like patterns in cities, large symmetrical pyramidal structures, and so forth. Taking into account these silly faces on Mars, the question then becomes, is there anything about the face on Mars that makes it quantifiably unique? Other than simply looking like a face, is there anything that makes it measurably different from the rest? Yes, there is. Now, while it's not so obvious to the naked eye, the face on Mars actually contains the geometric regularity that Carl Sagan once spoke of. How do we know this? We know this through the work of Dr. Mark Carlotto. In 2001, Dr. Carlotto published his paper titled Symmetry and Geometry of the Face on Mars Revealed, a new analysis based on the April 2001 image. The 1998 face photo was so bad, I heard that NASA Administrator Dan Golden ordered JPL to rephotograph it. In Carlotto's paper, he simply states that, quote, "The shape of the face appears to conform to underlying geometry based on 4 to 3 rectangles, diagonally bisected by 3, 4, 5 right triangles." Now don't worry, I'm going to show you exactly what he means. Let me walk you through his whole analysis. In order to properly examine the face, Dr. Carlotto first had to orthorectify the image. There's that word again. Quoting from his paper, "Orthorectification is the process of reprojecting an oblique image to appear as if it were acquired directly overhead. When planetary surfaces are imaged obliquely, for example, when the camera is looking off at an angle, the shape of objects on the ground is distorted. Correcting for these distortions is important in order to accurately analyze the symmetry and geometry of 3D objects on the ground. Here's an image of the ortho-rectified 2001 version of the face. Now please forgive me for the lower resolution image you see here, because it was taken directly from his paper and I don't have higher quality images that have been ortho-rectified. This is important. Allow me to distinguish the two main components of the face. There's what I like to call the interior face portion of this structure, and then the surrounding frame of the face. Dr. Carlotto identified that not only does the surrounding frame have 4:3 proportions, but that the interior face portion does as well. The first thing we notice here is that the frame of the face fills the space between the interior and exterior rectangles. And if we bisect the face along the horizontal axis and then mirror it, the frame's location matches pretty well. The same thing happens when we bisect the face along the vertical axis. And if we draw diagonal lines from one corner to another, we can start to see some more of that geometric regularity that Carl Sagan was talking about. In other words, the face on Mars has repeated expressions of internal geometry, multiple sizes of 4:3 rectangles and 3, 4, 5 right triangles. And I'd like to call more attention to these 3, 4, 5 right triangles. You might remember 3, 4, 5 right triangles from your high school geometry class. You might also remember that this particular triangle is associated with the ancient Greek philosopher Pythagoras. Most people might remember his famous Pythagorean theorem, which is a fundamental relation in Euclidean geometry between the three sides of a right triangle, blah, blah, blah. Simply put, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. The 3, 4, 5 right triangle is a mathematically significant triangle. I asked my friend Matt Barone for help to explain why. Matt is a geometry teacher who currently resides in Northeast Florida.
So when we're talking about the 3, 4, 5 right triangle, outside of geometry class, what significance can we attribute to this particular type of triangle?
Yeah, great question. So it's used extensively in building and construction. We find it in framing houses, sealing and buttressing up roofs. And so it has this unique ability to have structural integrity when we're building any sort of structure. It's also found in ancient Egypt in the second biggest pyramid on the Giza Plateau in G2. Yes, also known as the Khafre Pyramid. So this has been discovered because of the side lengths and the slope angles. They know that the slope angle is about 36 degrees, which is the degree angle of a 3, 4, 5 right triangle. And they've also done this using the measurements of the side lengths in Royal Egyptian cubits and also in feet. And so they know that that has been encoded into G2, the Khafre Pyramid.
So the ancient Egyptians had an understanding of this principle.
It's clear that they were well aware of this.
What about scalability?
So you can take any triangle and scale it up by a scale factor. So let's just say we take our 3, 4, 5 right triangle, and we have a scale factor. Let's say we want to increase the scale by 10. So our scale factor is going to be 10. We can take that scale factor and multiply it by every side length in the right triangle. And so 10 times 3 gives me 30. 10 times 4?
40.
Gives me 40. 10 times 5?
50.
Gives me 50. And you can do this with any scale factor. So it's scalable. So if you have a particular triangle that you're trying to place or to build and construct something with, you can scale this very basic, fundamentally structurally sound triangle to any size that you need.
Matt, lately we've been hearing a lot about sacred geometry. And for those who don't know what sacred geometry is, how does that compare to just regular geometry?
So sacred geometry is essentially geometry, but it adds a couple more layers to the discipline of standard Euclidean geometry, which is what we learned in high school.
Okay.
Sacred geometry would add philosophy and taking it a step further.
Philosophy.
Yes.
Okay.
And so there is deep esoteric meaning behind some of the geometry we find encoded on the planet Earth in relation to the moon that we see all the time. Okay. I can show you here in a quick diagram. This was discovered and credited to John Michel, who was an amazing geometer and wrote several books. But if we have a simple circle here drawn to the proportions of the Earth,
Okay.
and then we take our moon, drawn to the proportions of the moon, and we make it tangent to the Earth circle.
Tangent meaning?
Tangent meaning touching at exactly 1 point.
Okay.
Okay? And if we put a box around our Earth circle, we've essentially circumscribed a box about there. And if we can place a triangle directly here in the corner, we have a perfect 3, 4, 5 right triangle. Okay? So we can see that this is sort of connected to the heavens and our reality down here on Earth. So it's very interesting that that fits like that.
So you're saying if this were drawn to scale, with this circle being the Earth and this being our moon, they were touching at a tangent, and you tried to visualize a triangle here in this space, that distance and this distance would essentially equate to a 3, 4, 5 right triangle.
Correct. Yeah, those numbers reduce down to 3, 4, 5 right triangle. And it's also another interesting fact, and this is a big part of sacred geometry. If you take a dot directly in the center of our moon circle, and then taking a radius from the center of our Earth circle to the center of our moon, and then construct another circle about this, that new circle that we just drawn has a circumference that matches the perimeter of our box around the Earth circle, which has deep philosophical meaning in connecting the feminine and the masculine at a universal level. And so it is mathematically impossible to have a circle that has a circumference, which is the distance around, matching the perimeter of a square. This is because of the transcendental nature of pi. Pi is an irrational number that goes on forever.
Okay, what does pi look like? Remind us.
So the symbol for pi, like this, and you might remember from your studies in geometry class that it's about 3.14.
Okay.
But it's not just 3.14. It's 3.14, and it's a non-repeating.
Just keeps going and going.
Keeps going forever. So we say that it's irrational, has no end. And so because it has no end, you could never get exactly the same circumference of a circle to the perimeter of a square. But you can get very, very close. In fact, some people can algebraically get almost exact using a very well-rounded, accepted idea for pi, which is 22/7, which gets you very close to pi. A lot of standardized tests use 22/7 as a way to calculate pi.
Mm-hmm. Matt, can you tell us who Carl Friedrich Gauss was?
So Carl Friedrich Gauss was a brilliant prodigy German mathematician who lived in the 1800s.
Oh, okay. And how did he propose to use the Pythagorean theorem to communicate with a potential alien civilization?
So Gauss had this incredible idea to create a 3, 4, 5 right triangle in the landscape, very large that could be seen. In the landscape? Yes, on the side of a mountain, large enough that could be observed from space. So that if there was an intelligence out there observing, they would recognize this.
Like if there's a spaceship flying overhead and they're just looking down with a telescope or something.
Sure, possibly. And he proposed that this would be very large, put into the landscape, and it would look something like this, where you have your 3, 4, 5 right triangle.
Okay.
And then on each side of that, you would have a square matching the side length. So you would have a square coming up off the 5, another square coming down off the 4 side, and another square coming off the 3 side, so that each side of the square matched the side of the 3, 4, 5.
Okay, so he wanted to make something like this on the side of a mountain, large enough to be seen from space, as a way to communicate, hey, there's intelligence down here. And at a glance, you can see that because nature wouldn't come up with something like this.
Correct. Obviously, this would be an artificial structure that you could see from a distance, and you would be able to tell that this was not a natural formation.
Okay. So does this sound crazy, or is this a well-accepted proposal, a method for the idea of if you were to communicate with an alien species using mathematics as that universal language?
Yeah, it's widely accepted that mathematics would be the communication medium between two species that are fundamentally completely different, evolving on two different celestial bodies. But geometry and mathematics would be the universal language, and this would be one of the basic forms to communicate intelligence.
Because we hear a lot about SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, and I think a lot of people understand that to mean there's people listening to see if they can find any radio waves coming in from outer space. But this is a different approach, a more simple approach.
More simple, but very elegant and quite effective if anybody is watching.
So Gauss in the 1800s proposed a way that we could try to communicate with an alien civilization, just passing by or whatever, using the landscape as a way to visually demonstrate there's intelligence here on Earth through mathematics, geometry. When we look at Mars and the face on Mars and factor in the work of Dr. Mark Carlotto, who has identified that the face seems to be proportioned almost precisely with the 3, 4, 5 right triangles in mind. There are some that claim that this feature was artificially constructed, and if so, the builders or designers had the 3, 4, 5 right triangle in mind when doing so. If it's just a natural landform, well, it still exhibits signs of 3, 4, 5 right triangle. But the idea that the face on Mars is used for the same purpose, to try to communicate with a passerby that there is or perhaps was life there, intelligent life on that planet, it seems like Gauss has provided that precedent, meaning the idea that communicating with mathematics in the landscape on a planetary body, not so crazy.
It doesn't seem so crazy, and if it is indeed artificial, it's a very elegant and very clever way to incorporate a humanoid-looking face, but also the mathematics and the geometry that would constitute a cosmic handshake.
That's good. Yeah, that was good. Would constitute a cosmic handshake. Boom.
Now, going one step further, Dr. Mark Carlotto actually provided another way of examining the face and quantifiably demonstrating just how unique it is from the surrounding area. In his paper titled "A Method for Searching for Artificial Objects on Planetary Surfaces," Dr. Carlotto argues that fractal modeling can help inform our analysis of the face. Now, what the heck is a fractal? The definition of a fractal is any of various extremely irregular curves or shapes for which any suitably chosen part is similar in shape to a given larger or smaller part when magnified or reduced to the same size. Now, I know that doesn't make any sense, but look, you're gonna get it. Ready? Boom. We find fractals in nature all the time. This is well known in science. And if you take this example satellite image and run it through specialized fractal analysis software, you can clearly see the lighter areas that rank the airplanes as having a low degree of fractal properties. As Dr. Carlotto explains, quote, "The fractal approach finds artificial objects by eliminating the parts of an image that are not fractal and hence not natural. This makes it easy for satellite imaging experts to tell the difference between artificial objects and the natural landscape. Now, this is important for national security reasons when we're trying to quickly identify the difference between a tank and a tree on foreign soil, let's say. And if you run the face through this fractal software, well, it lights up as well, suggesting that it also has a low degree of fractal properties and strongly suggests it is not a natural landform. So even the computer thinks it's different. So if it's not a natural landform, why would an intelligent civilization create a giant face on the surface of the planet to be seen from outer space? Well, as it turns out, there's actually historical precedent for this. Now, to help explain more, let's go to my interview with Mars researcher and author George Haas. Mr. Haas is the founder of the Cydonia Institute. What the heck is this?
This is an artwork. This is a face produced by a Japanese-American artist, Noguchi.
An artist known as Noguchi. When did he make this?
This was produced as a conceptual piece in 1947.
Now, when you say conceptual piece, what are you talking about?
Well, this was a proposal. This was an art idea that he had, which was supposed to be a large land formation.
So this is something small that he made.
Correct.
But you're saying he wanted to make this bigger.
It was going to be a huge mile-long face.
He wanted to make a mile-long face where?
Somewhere in the United States.
Why?
That was never... he wanted to build this to be the face to be seen from Mars.
He wanted to make this in 1947 to be the face to be seen from Mars.
Yes, in 1947.
Well, why did he make this?
Noguchi built this whole concept was inspired by the dropping of the bombs at Nagasaki. He believed that in the future, if the world had a nuclear disaster, we'd have to have some remnant constructed that future civilizations could see. So he wanted to build this big face as a marker that could be seen by future generations to show that we were here. It's exactly what they did on Mars.
So you're saying somebody passing by Earth,
somebody flying over would say, oh, look, that face looks familiar. And
they wouldn't just see scorched earth, they could see that there was...
Because this would be so large with this oval forehead and the triangular nose, this would be a huge, like I said, at least a mile-long face.
And that would indicate to a passerby that there was
we
once
were here.
Intelligent...
Yes. Looky here, as we've heard before.
Okay.
Now, in 1947, we really didn't know much about Mars. We didn't have the NASA program, and a lot of people fantasized that there were a civilization on Mars. We had the canals of Mars, and we really didn't know a lot about Mars. So there was a lot of interest in trying to communicate if there was someone on Mars. And this also would have served that purpose of Noguchi's idea of building this face that he called to be seen from Mars.
So this is in 1947?
1947, way before the NASA program.
Mm-hmm. So this idea of using a face on the surface, a large face on the surface of a planet to communicate to somebody else that there was an intelligent species there, this was a concept that was known even before the face on Mars.
That's the beauty of this. This concept of building a huge face to be seen by passerbys was originated here on Earth by Noguchi, 1947, way before we found out about the face on Mars. The face on Mars wasn't found until 1976.
So the face on Mars, the significance of what it could be, if it is in fact intended to serve that same purpose.
Correct. They may have had the same idea.
Maybe it's not so crazy.
No, it's not.
Now, beyond Noguchi's artistic concept for a face on Earth to be seen from Mars, the Nazca lines in Peru also pose an interesting question. Why did our ancient ancestors carve giant geoglyphs into the Earth if they could only be seen from high above? Given the giant geoglyphs, Noguchi's face concept, and Gauss's Pythagorean right triangle proposal, is it really unreasonable to consider the possibility that the face's construction was purposeful? Dr. Carlotto's quantifiable data on the face puts the odds of it being a natural landform at 1 in a million. Now, I have to give Richard Hoagland a lot of credit here. He was on the ground covering the Viking mission, and he documented everything extensively in his book, The Monuments of Mars. And I'd like to end with a quote from his book. He says, "That afternoon, so many years ago at JPL, as a group of press passed around copies of the face photograph and laughed, someone had jokingly remarked that the face is to tell us where to land. Now, looking at the image, I realized it wasn't a joke at all."